Hey everybody, I'm Nick Beatleston with Good Impacts. Thanks for tuning in for Riding Waves of Change with Sam Bennett. This ethical entrepreneur webinar is presented by Good Impacts. We're helping guide ethical entrepreneurs along their business journey. We provide a number of services, everything from project design and implementation all the way to helping facilitate systemic industry change. Way easier than it sounds. And we also work with a handful of nonprofits in Michigan and beyond. If you're interested in finding out more, please go to goodimpacts.com or feel free to drop me a line. Couple of quick housekeeping notes. Everybody's muted, and you will be for the duration of the chat. But if you do have any questions, please feel free to either use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen or the chat function. Either one works. And then this webinar is being recorded for future use. Quick bit about me, and then we're going to talk about the much more interesting Sam. I started Good Impacts in 2018, originally Sustainable Development Solutions, but it turns out that makes for a terrible URL. And a very difficult to remember name. I've got a background in communications and journalism, and I've worked with a number of NGOs and development organizations, specifically around supply chain and community development initiatives. And before that, spent a little bit of time with the Army. But we're going to talk about Sam, because Sam is definitely more interesting. Hawaii native, born and bred, loud, proud. He's got his business management and marketing degree from Loyola, and he's worked for a number of well-known and really impressive companies, Red Bull, GoPro, so on. And in 2016, Sam decided to switch it up from the corporate lifestyle trajectory and focus on supporting mission-driven organizations. Yeah, Sam, can you brag a little bit about some of the really cool organizations that you've had a chance to work with since starting Swell Minded?
Sure. Yeah. It's been a fun journey. I guess, since 2016, time's flying. Well, it was the end of that year, so it's really been more about 3 years, coming up on 4. But for me, and kind of, building off of that quick little intro, I had come from the brand space, so I knew global lifestyle brands. And I kind of got to a point in my career, which we can dive into a little bit later, but just needed to switch it up, felt kind of unfulfilled and wanted more. And so started actually trying to find solutions to some issues that I saw, which I didn't see coming from the private business sector. And so I actually turned to the nonprofit sector, finding marine biologists and scientists who knew what was happening in the world of climate change. Jumped on board there to figure out how I could help out and increase the good work they were doing. And of course, as I jumped in for that kind of corporate development with nonprofits and businesses, just realized that there's so much opportunity for businesses to get involved and do more. And so, it's been a kind of an ongoing combination of working with nonprofits like groups like Save the Waves out of Santa Cruz. Some friends and I actually, I guess I should better say, I watched some close friends of mine start the Changing Tides Foundation, and I've been their #1 cheerleader as a board member from the start. Then from there, collaborations between those two groups with well-known brands like Patagonia. You and I were just talking about a quick collaboration I've got going with Salesforce, the large group out of San Francisco. And through all those collaborations, now my specific focus with Swell Minded these 3 years in is specifically now focusing on building brands and building partnerships that prioritize people on the planet, that stand to do good and make a good impact. And so, going from still kind of big brands to now starting from scratch with startups from the ground up, and then building partnerships everywhere kind of in between.
So another thing that we talked about was how the environment where you grew up really shaped who you are. Can you speak a little bit about that and how that environment created the values that guide you?
Yeah, well, and a quick clarification. I'm from Hawaii, born in Hawaii, but not native Hawaiian, just to clarify. My family actually, great great grandparents came through Michigan from Europe. I'm learning then out through LA, worked for the train, one of the train companies out to LA in the early 1900s. My mom was born in LA, and then she herself kept going west and ran out to Hawaii, and met my dad out there. So yeah, anyways, growing up in the outdoors, we were kind of talking similar to here. We're just surrounded by beauty everywhere you look in nature, and yeah. So for me, uh, being in the outdoors there, along with in Hawaii, if you've ever been or you hear of the aloha spirit, it's just kind of the culture that those indigenous and native Hawaiians do bring, that they've always had this culture as they've used these values to sustain their own life for generations and generations and generations. But aloha, for those that don't know, means love, affection, peace, compassion, and mercy. It's kind of the greeting and the goodbye in Hawaii. You say, hello, goodbye with aloha. But the deeper spiritual context, actually, the native Hawaiians use the word for is actually to define the force that holds all of existence together. So really deep. And I guess, growing up in that kind of environment, with those ideals and those examples through the elders, then too, just being a little kid going out to surf and hike in the woods and everything. I don't know if for me, I just realized as you observe nature, you realize that, everything really is connected, that all these little pieces pull together to make this beautiful puzzle that work in unison and kind of collaborate with each other to build the beautiful life that we get to experience and see. So yeah, some of those values specifically that guided my life and now have guided my career trajectory as well. I remember Hawaiian elders early on teaching me, really simple values around just being human. First and foremost, we're human beings together. We're global citizens. In Hawaii, you're stuck on an island in the middle of the Pacific, so you really do need to be helpful. You need to, as the lava's coming down the hill from the volcano, you can't just push your buddy in to run faster, because you then go to the same family and share a same dinner meal together afterwards. So be human, be helpful, and then be humble too. Just knowing that you're a small piece of this bigger piece of puzzle that pulls together.
Yeah, I never really thought about what a geographically self-contained environment, how that influences a culture, and what that really necessitates. Collaboration has to be the norm.
Yeah. If you want to eat, you've got to, anytime you go to a picnic out there, you've got to show up with bananas, or you've got to show up with something. You can't just come and take, because you'll get kicked off the island pretty quick.
So how do you make the leap from that upbringing to a business degree? They almost
Yeah,
seem incongruous, but
sure. Well, yeah, my father actually was an entrepreneur. He's was a general contractor. He had hippie stories of how he moved out to Hawaii and started building tree houses just to live off the land out in the woods. And ultimately, luckily for him and me and us, that became a career in as a general contractor building private homes. So yeah, I've always grown up seeing him as a project manager. Same thing, pulling teams and subcontractors together with this shared vision of a house and a beautiful home to build. And that put me with business in my mind. As mentioned, my grandparents were in LA, so I chose Los Angeles and went to Loyola Marymount University. And immediately, small private school, they're very fortunate to go. It was my reach academic school. I didn't think I'd get in, and somehow got in. So I had to jump at it. And through just my values and personal interests, I remember I was on the club surf team there in LMU, and a senior at the time, I was a sophomore, was graduating, and he had an internship with Red Bull, and he needed to find his predecessor. And so for some reason, he looked at me and said, "You're going to be the guy. You're the right fit." And of course, I interviewed and went through the process, but started an internship with Red Bull, which took me what was more of a business management focus straight into marketing. I interned with Red Bull my junior, senior year, even through the summers, and then immediately stepped into a full-time role as I graduated and stayed with that brand for 5 years there in Los Angeles.
so between Red Bull GoPro, definitely a pattern emerging there, and you definitely could have continued down that trajectory, and I'm assuming had a long, happy, successful career. But why the pivot?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. Sticking with that story, I mean, as you can imagine, those were amazing experiences. From Red Bull, jumped up to GoPro. Some friends went up early on to help start that brand. And so in 2012, they called me up with the job. Within marketing, I had, I viewed, or I come to learn marketing was simply just a conversation between a brand and a group. And ultimately it was a one-way conversation. If you think of billboards or commercials where we as consumers are over inundated and put our walls up. I loved marketing, and it became to learn and experience and fell in love with event marketing because it was this experiential marketing where it was a two-way conversation, right? The consumers opting in to be a part of that experience. And then through that same analogy, you're communicating not through just one sense of hearing a radio ad, but all five senses are activated as you bring those to life. So specifically, as I jumped to GoPro, I went to go help build the events team and start to expand that globally. And yeah, that too was an amazing roller coaster ride. So fortunate and lucky to have had those experiences, and that close network that pulled me up there. So I was with GoPro from 2012 to 2016 up to starting Swell Minded. And it was actually in the kind of pivotal shift there, at those brands, was in love with my work and loved the community and the culture, and saw myself there, wanting to be the CEO someday, and saw myself climbing the ladder slowly. But it was in 2014, actually, the year we went public with GoPro, the year we IPO'd, actually. I watched this group that brought me in, this small group of surfers initially that had this idea for GoPro. They were a bunch of college friends that to see them go from concept to this successful IPO. In fact, that year our CEO became the highest paid CEO in the US in 2014 with that IPO. So really seeing the Cinderella success story of these surfer bros take it that far helped me understand the power and the resources that could pull together when, through this collaboration. But I remember that year specifically when we IPO'd, I went back home to Hawaii for the first time in the summer, and I was out surfing the waves that I grew up surfing on. I experienced coral bleaching for the first time. I remember just, you use the rocks to line up out in the lineup so you know where you're at. So you become really surfing the same spot my whole life and become really familiar with knowing all of these rocks in this reef. And so to look down and to see this ghostly white bleached coral head that had never been there my whole life, that was just my first kind of experience, and became aware of what was happening with climate change. And right at the same time, I was managing my global events, traveling the world. Luckily, we had this one event, the GoPro Mountain Games, that I would manage as a senior project manager. That event alone took 150 internal employees to pull together. We had 350 volunteers come together to help us bring that event to life. That event brought out 3,000 athletes. We had 80,000 spectators come out to that event in Vail, Colorado. We had live music from the Cold War kids. We had 140 different sponsors, from Go RVing to, NBC was there filming TV shows, and all of that. That event generated this economic impact to the town of Vail of 6.2 million just for the one weekend. So again, to kind of see, learning these systems and processes of how a business can operate, and ultimately how people can collaborate and to do something, to create this huge economic impact and this great value. But at the same time, for me, and with that experience of coral bleaching, I felt this disconnect. I felt this gap between what I thought success looked like, and then, achieving that, and thinking just that there was more and that I wanted more. So that was that kind of pivotal moment that from there, as I mentioned, I started to just volunteer on the side from 2014 to 16, kind of moonlighting, had my full-time day job. But then, as mentioned, some friends started a nonprofit and put me on the board, and started volunteering with other nonprofits just to start to try, as I mentioned, to find scientists and marine biologists who knew what was happening and knew the solutions, and then really just align with them to figure out how to scale up the good work they were doing.
Thank God you guys were able to raise some money for Vail, that poor struggling Colorado town.
Exactly. Right. And great point. You know what? The beauty of capitalism and the power that it can create, and then just seeing an opportunity to take and leverage that to do a little bit more altruistically with it.
So along those lines, when you look back at some of the mission-driven organizations that you've worked with, be they for-profit or nonprofit, what are some of the similarities that you've seen? What are some of the through lines that those organizations share?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And thinking on this too, so I would say, you know, just on the theme of values and beliefs, ultimately, back to trying to find the founders. I've had a few different projects and I continue to find projects where, I'll find an existing brand and figure out if I can help, if I can get in there and get involved. But another lens as I, in that development process myself is really trying to understand the real goals of the organization. And that to me always goes all the way up to the founders and the owners, and really understanding what their definition of success is. I was just listening to the last episode actually in prep of your interview with Bob Sutherland from Cherry Republic, and just hearing him speak and talk about values, immediately, well, I've never met him yet, but first I want to hang out with him because he seems like such a cool guy with those values and would love to go, on the lake or do something out, go hike in the woods. But then no wonder that then the business that he created, had that 1% give back from the start and a lot of those initiatives from the start. So for me, it's really, that's the proof in the pudding. That's the greenwashing versus actually embedding those values into the core of your business, making that a part of your bottom line to prioritize people and planet in some sort of way. Then of course, right, once those values are there, there's, depending on the organization, there's a bunch of different frameworks and best practices out there to align yourself with and how you can bring those values to life. Everything from the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals to science-based targets for carbon emissions, all of that. But I really do think at the end of the day, it's just back to those core values and beliefs that you have as an individual, as the organizers of this organization, brand values to life as well.
So you've worked on a lot of really cool partnerships. And I think oftentimes when folks are thinking about what private nonprofit partnerships could look like, oftentimes that conversation doesn't make it past the fiscal sponsorship part of it. But we know that there's so much more that businesses can do when they start to partner with NGOs or with causes. What are some of those important keys to creating real value-driven partnerships, not just the financial sponsorship?
Switching from values to value-based partnerships there, I think, in that definition of what value is, ultimately it's kind of your resource allocations, your time, your money, your energy, whatever else you're bringing to the market too, though, your product or your marketing, your talent, your workforce, your skill set. As I mentioned, a small little project I'm helping out with, Salesforce, for example, one of the biggest ways they give back is just with their paid volunteer time. It's a requirement if you work at Salesforce that you have to hit a minimum, I think it's maybe 60 hours a year or something, don't quote me on that, but it's a big chunk that every employee is obligated to, and it's actually a part of their performance evaluations with their manager when they sit and manage. That's a key part of that bottom line kind of definition of success. So for me in building partnerships, it really is this goal to make it more of a value exchange and ultimately trying to make it a mutually beneficial value exchange. And so, the quick short term could just be a check, donation. But I think if you kind of back out of it and revisit the reason that you're drawn to that partnership in the first place, ultimately it's likely because you saw some overlapping goals between the two groups. And once you realize that you're trying to do and accomplish the same thing in the long term, then I hope, that helps you kind of put those specifics aside, to then look at it from a more value-based perspective to say, okay, maybe I don't have that for a donation right now, but maybe I can do something else to help us get there. Or maybe, collaboratively we can come up with this new initiative that's going to generate the revenue we both need on our behalf by creating a product together or something. from there, that'll ultimately get you to that same goal. So yeah, aligning those values from the start and then kind of getting creative to figure out how to get there along the way.
And that's a really interesting example, regardless of what the actual hour amount is. There are many companies that have VTO or volunteer time off policies where, you know, you're paid your normal rate, maybe some portion of it for volunteering, but that's a lot different than our expectation as an organization is that you engage in these activities. If you want to prove that your values are aligned with our company's values and you feel that, you know, you should be able to be promoted within the organization, that's the difference between built in versus bolted on. It's not a policy, it's a culture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's just, you can imagine that's one example, but with that culture totally ingrained, then it goes so much further to exactly kind of how they define success to their investors and their owners every day. And looking at some of those best examples out there, I mean, of course, I point to Patagonia, but you know, that was part of my founder's story, was wanting to create more, not just keep pointing to Patagonia as the best practice, but figure out how we can do more. And thinking of another group like Salesforce too, one thing that they do so well, and there's this shift right now where traditionally that definition of success was shareholder value, but now it's really changing. And part of that, you know, from this value perspective is now considering all stakeholders instead, are not instead in addition to your shareholders, but, you know, thinking, okay, who does this business touch? Who and what does this business touch? The resources, the natural environment throughout the entire process of that concept to completion, you know, no matter what you're making. And then within that, right, that's part of those values too. Like, how can we make this positive impact on everybody and the whole line there?
Well, I could keep asking questions forever, but I'd love to open it up to all the attendees. So if you've got questions, folks, feel free to throw them in the chat function down at the bottom, or use the Q&A function also. Yeah, we've got one here, Sam, that I'm definitely interested in. Looking at ethical brands today, you know, when you look around on social media or wherever and see ethical brands, putting on your marketing hat, what do you think something a lot of them could do better?
Well, with my lens, and my experience and my skills, I think for me, it is communicating better and collaborating better. It's hard to talk about ourselves. I struggle and I'm constantly improving myself. And so nobody, and you know, me with that personal goal of being humble too, I don't want to go around saying, look at me, here's what I do. But there's, you know, I think at the same time, right, we'll be really quick to communicate the financial success that we achieve, whether that, you know, be a round of investment from partners, or whether that just be hitting sales goals for the quarter, or whatever that is. So right now, with a lot of the groups that I'm working with, we're taking a clear look at, you know, how we can, just more clearly articulate both the good that we're attempting and hoping to do as an invitation to invite more collaboration, help us get there. But then also we need to celebrate the wins along the way and kind of use that to make sure that, you know, again, kind of whether it's metrics that you're using to evaluate and measure, or if it's more qualitative on, you know, bigger picture goals that you're trying to achieve, you constantly need that feedback loop to know what's working and not working so that you can improve and move upon it. So first, I think more clear communication on the good work that each group's doing. But then next, partnerships, that collaboration bit, where I think, you know, we all get stuck in our silos, when if we took a step back, we probably share some big overlapping goals together as groups. So just trying to find other individuals, other nonprofits that are working in a similar space, from governments to different brands that are all kind of overlapping, and trying to figure out how to best pull together to share those resources to, again, work towards those same goals together.
Another great question from Kathy, who wants to know if the Great Lakes are part of Changing Tide's mission, and if not, do you think they'd be open to including the Great Lakes?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. So the Changing Tides Foundation, we actually just did a nice mission revision, as we've been a few years now activating in the space. And so we haven't this has been an internal process, and so now we're getting ready how to figure out how to externally communicate it. So it's not on the website or anything yet, but the mission now is really simply and clearly to empower women and girls to protect the planet. So we're going to start to focus in on that a lot more. And that's everything from, youth mentorship programs around the world, teaching, girls and women how to surf, but then also giving them platforms and holding space for them to create community together and a sisterhood that they can inspire each other to stand up for what they believe in. So yes, absolutely. Now that I'm new to the Great Lakes myself and have been just starting to surf it, other ocean, like Save the Waves group that I work with, we've already actually talked about it. We know we've got a partner in our coalition at Surfrider. Surfrider does have a chapter out here too, I think out of Chicago. So trying to pull them up here more. But there's also just so many great organizations that exist that have been doing this work for so long. How Nick and I met actually was through a flow event, the Soup and Bread night, I think it was. So I'm still inspired by them and trying to learn more about their mission and how I can help out. And then Great Lakes Business Network is another group I'm chatting with, trying to figure out, see if I can help in any way. And continue to just be, again, inspired by all the good work at this local level.
And along those lines, Sam, a question from Haley, just wanting to know if you have examples of businesses who really typify using their power to advocate for policies to protect the environment.
Sure. Well, I guess locally I'm learning. And so I was, like I mentioned already, inspired by Cherry Republic there, just that last interview that you held. And, his example there of his personal meeting with Yvon Chouinard from Patagonia, I think is who we all look up to and aspire to. And really for them, that was, before even thinking of making profit and moving into a business, for him, it was giving back from the start with that 1% for the planet mission. They're, within those partnerships and groups, I am connected with 1% for the planet. One of my startups that I'm helping launch just became a B Corp, benefit corporation. So we're now in that cohort. With that same group, we're now a part of Climate Neutral, which is another commitment to be carbon neutral. Seeing these, and all of those are kind of these certifications similar to an organic certification that we see in the grocery store, for example. Turning to those, that's become this new great lens that, it's deeper than just talk, right? Those frameworks actually perform audits to then give off that certification. So it is looking at the bottom line ultimately to make sure proof is in the pudding. Any of those groups. I mean, I've got personal friends like Sunski Sunglasses that have been a part of those groups from the start. Other friends like Indosole Shoes who make shoes and their soles come from recycling motorcycle bike tires out of Indonesia and pulling them out of the landfills. So many cool concepts. Pareo Skateboards is one that Patagonia helped invest in on, but they're collecting discarded fishing nets in the oceans and upcycling that plastic into a skateboard. And I think they're starting to expand now into sunglasses, and they just partnered with Patagonia on making the brim of their hats out of recycled plastic too.
They've got an awesome, I think it's maybe only 5, maybe 7-minute video on that. That really, you don't have to have a background in really anything to get how cool that program is and how they're taking two seemingly disparate sectors and really connecting them. It's really cool. We've got a couple more questions, but I think we're gonna have to call it just to try and stick to our timeline. But Sam, for folks that want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Thanks again for having me, and happy to follow up with anybody or have more conversations. And thanks for throwing it on the screen there. So, connecting with Sam is Swell-Minded there. You can find me just swellminded.co. That's .co. You can find me on Facebook. I've got LinkedIn. You can reach out to my email, just sam@swellminded.co. I look forward to connecting with this entire network up here, and I'm happy to help in any way I can.
What if folks want to connect with Bob? Sorry about that, everybody. There's no way that I repurposed a PowerPoint from a previous conversation for this, because that'd be wildly unprofessional. Sorry about that, Sam.
No, and I'm glad, again, Bob, I look forward to meeting you soon.
Well, don't worry, I didn't screw up my information. So if anybody wants to connect with Good Impacts, learn about webinars that we've got coming up, feel free to visit our website. You can also sign up for our newsletter, or feel free to drop me a line, bob@goodimpacts.com, or Nick if that doesn't work for you. Sam, anything else to say to the nice people before we call it a day and find a good reason to go outside?
Yeah, no, just thanks for being here. Thanks for the time. Thanks for the interest in trying to do better and make a good impact. Thank you, Nick, for pulling us all together and continuing to organize around this important topic.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good day.